Hello guys and welcome to this October 2020 bullet journal plan with me video. This month's theme is super special and something that's been highly requested, but let's first quickly flip through the previous month so you'll see how the pages turned out. This fall theme from last month was definitely one of my all-time favorites, but once we reach the next empty spread, it's time to start setting up this new month. So some of you could probably guess from the thumbnail that this month we're taking a trip to Hogwarts here on my channel and setting a Harry Potter inspired monthly theme. I know Harry Potter is not everyone's cup of tea, but I hope you'll still find something interesting from this video. There are various decorations that I think you could definitely use even without the Harry Potter title. And for the rest of you fellow Potter fans, I hope this theme will meet your expectations. Just a quick disclaimer though, that this will probably be the most overly extra bullet journal theme you've ever seen. I wanted to really focus on the decorations this month, so you've been warned. But as you can see, I wanted to start this journey with a full spread size landscape painting of the Hogwarts castle. This was definitely the first thing that came to my mind when I was brainstorming ideas for this theme, and I thought it was the perfect piece for the cover spread. So I started everything with a pencil sketch, and I actually worked with this sketch for quite a while, especially with the castle itself. This landscape was overall pretty detailed and took a lot of time, so since we have so many other decorations to go through today as well, I'm actually gonna post a separate video of this painting in the next few days, where I'm spending a little bit more time to explain everything in more detail. But anyway, let's still go through everything quickly here as well. So after the pencil sketch, I started to draw all the main parts of this painting with my Pigma Micron 005 pen. Using a pretty thin pen will definitely help with all the small details, especially on the castle. So again, my main focus was on the castle itself and also on the train bridge that I wanted to have here in the front. But otherwise, I just spent a little bit time to sketch the main outlines of the scenery. I wanted there to be a lot of mountains and forest, and then this river that's dividing the scenery a little bit here in the middle. We're gonna keep adding the black lines as this painting progresses, but in this point I decided to start laying down the first layers of watercolors. Now you could go into a million different directions with the color scheme, but I decided to keep everything a bit more fall appropriate and create this very warm fallish landscape. So I used my watercolors this time and actually started with the sky. That is probably the least interesting part of this whole painting. I just added a hint of this grayish color there so that it wouldn't be completely white, but otherwise I didn't want it to steal any attention from the rest of the painting. But after that, I decided to just start from the most difficult part, that would be the castle. I went with these warmish gray tones here again and started with some very light base layers that we can easily start intensifying with more details. I think that was the way I worked with this whole painting actually. So I kind of spent time on one area at a time and kept gradually adding the intensity of the colors everywhere. This way you're able to build things up slowly, and also you can add details on top of the first layers of color because they have had time to dry in between. Then try to decide a direction of your light source. For me it was kinda in the middle here, and then think about which sides of the structures should be lighter and which darker. With the landscape itself, you don't need to be too careful with the colors in this point, because as I said, we're gonna add a lot of detail on top of everything, so having some variation in the base colors will make the painting more interesting later. I think for me the most difficult thing about this painting was to not get the colors too muddy and keep some light highlights. I didn't succeed in that everywhere, to be honest, especially the forest was such a pain for me to work on. So I resolved that by adding a few lighter highlights in the end with gouache paints. I also started to add a lot of these lines and random scribbles on top of the color layers with my black pen. That helped to bring back some of the sharpness and character to this painting. I kind of wished I didn't need to use a black pen as much because this almost cartoony style it created wasn't necessarily the look I was going for. But you know, that sometimes happens, and I think it's better to change the direction while drawing if the first attempt just doesn't seem to work out. But in the end, I think I was the most satisfied with the castle itself, and the landscape could have honestly benefited from some changes. I'll of course add this painting to my shop and make a whole Harry Potter themed update there with stickers and digital downloads as well, but I think I'll definitely touch up this painting digitally to get it to the place I originally wanted. But yeah, about 10 hours of painting and 7 mental breakdowns later, this over-the-top cover art piece was finally done. I'm not gonna lie, this was especially painful to cut in half, and I needed to cut the sides a bit as well to fit it to my journal. But in the end, I think this was definitely an eye-catching cover page that will give a nice direction for the rest of this theme. And it just needed the monthly title that I added to the top right. You could go with a more Harry Potter style font as well, but I thought it would be a bit much for this painting, to be honest, so I just stick with my usual cursive font. But now let's move on, and next we are setting up this monthly overview spread that I wanted to give a bit more simple after the first painting session. So I started with a small October title that I actually kept pretty similar to the last month's one. This time though, I decided to bring back these black title boxes that I haven't actually used for a while. My favorite pen combination for these types of titles is the black Tombow Fudenosuke and then the white Uniball Signo pen, but that one sometimes gives me a headache and starts skipping, so when that happens I switch to the Uniposca white marker. Anyway, I know this calendar is pretty small, so you can't fit much here, but I also left room for an important date section to the next page where you could fit some more detailed monthly planning. But before we move there, let's first draw this illustration where I kind of tried to combine the Deathly Hallows and the Golden Snitch. I totally stole this idea from Pinterest, but it's such a fun shape to play with and decorate however you like. So I started by sketching out this whole thing with a pencil and just had fun creating all these geometric shapes and symbols and then the wings for the snitch. Using a ruler with the triangle will definitely make everything look a lot cleaner, and then all kinds of small dots and details will really bring the picture to life. After the pencil sketch, I started to fill the lines with two sizes of my microns. So for the thicker lines, I used the 0.5 size and then 0.1 for the rest. I actually intended to just leave this black and white, but then eventually decided to just add a wash of color with my watercolors, you know, just to add a bit more shadows here and there, and then a golden look for the snitch. But now that this decoration is done, I moved to the bottom of this page where there's still some space left, and I just decided to add the famous quote, "I open at the close," which refers to the golden snitch. After this page was done, I moved on to the next one where I just wanted to add two super simple boxes to keep everything a bit more low-key. I did add a small shadow box to them, and then tied the style together with the previous page by adding the same black box for the titles. You could use these boxes for whatever you usually like to track in your journal, and for me that would be my monthly important dates section and then my monthly content list for YouTube and Instagram. I really ended up liking the simplicity of this spread, especially since the others ended up being a bit more over the top this month. And speaking of over the top, let's flip our way to the next empty page where I wanted to set up no other than the Marauders map. This was the second idea that I definitely wanted to add to this Harry Potter theme, since I think it created such an interesting spread. So I started everything by folding these two pages in half, and we're gonna create the cover of the map on the top of them. And for the map itself, I just honestly followed the original design of the map, and you can find a lot of pictures of it online. But before the actual map, I actually started by splashing some light grayish brown watercolors to this whole spread, because I wanted it to have this slightly more old look. You can easily create these droplets by dipping your watercolor brush to water and then hitting it with your finger. You can also smear the color a bit on some areas, and you really don't need to be that careful in this point. Then again, we are starting the actual drawing process with a pencil sketch once again, and I decided to draw this castle thing first to the middle. The style of this map is actually pretty easy to copy and draw with a black pen, so I just followed the original design and started to draw these towers and borders of the castle. The lines and structures don't need to be perfectly straight or in perspective, since they are not in the original version either, so just pay attention to the spaces between each thing and that you're keeping the overall shape of the square in the center of these pages. Then when you have good enough pencil sketch, it's easy to just start to intensify those lines again with a black pen. Even the shadows in the original version were largely created with these lines, so that's what I did as well. And then after everything was done, I colored the inside of this castle yard with a brownish red watercolor mix and erased all the excess pencil strokes. After that, I started to work with the rest of this page. So again, I followed the original map but changed some things slightly. For example, I decided to leave out the text at the very top and instead add these parchment roll titles to the corners. I tried to imitate the original text fonts as much as possible, which was a little bit difficult because of the fold in the middle, but I realized that it doesn't need to be perfect to still have the look of the actual map. But yeah, then lastly I splashed some more of those watercolor droplets all over the spread and also added a slight wash of color to some of these decorations. Being a bit messy with the paints just adds to the look, so you don't really need to think about being too careful. But that then finally finished our map. The folded pages made opening and closing this spread a little bit difficult, so I decided to tape the other sides to keep it more in place. And now we also have the whole inside of this map for us to use. I thought this was the perfect place to write about my monthly goals, so that's exactly what we are gonna set up here next. So now that October is coming, it's time for the last quarter setup of this year. I've done this throughout this year, so basically I just want to write some overall goals for the next 3 months and just spend some time planning out what I would like to accomplish. I think this is always a great opportunity to take a look at your yearly goals and maybe choose an area that you would like to work on a bit longer time period. I also wanted to add a section for things that I'll leave for the next year, because there are always new things on my mind, but realistically speaking, there's not enough time to complete all of it this year. Then the next page will be more reserved for this month's planning. I thought these folds in the middle of the pages worked as a nice way to separate them into these columns. So on this one, I started by adding this small box of my priority in October. Below that, I added a list for some action steps, but as I said last month, really limiting down my monthly goals has been a very effective way to stop trying to overachieve and take too much on my plate. I still struggle with it, but at least this helps a little bit. But if you struggle with similar overachieving problems, definitely try giving this approach a try. Then on this last column, I decided to try a new way to plan for this month, and I divided this space into these 4 sections that can work as some kind of weekly planning. I like the idea of giving each week some kind of a theme, especially since my months are pretty divided like that. So for example, one week could be spent mostly for filming, then the next one for creating Instagram content, and the last one for stocking stickers and prints for my shop. I really like this secretive look the map created for the monthly plan section, but now before we move on to create the last pages of this setup, I'll take a quick moment to talk about this month's sponsor, who's Nordcreen. You probably noticed the beautiful watch I've been wearing in this video, and it's from this month's sponsor, which is a Scandinavian watch brand based in Denmark. Their watches are designed by Jacob Wagner, and all of them have this timeless, minimalistic design that is exactly what you want from a watch. And the best part is that the watches are ethically made in Danish-owned, union-certified factories. The packaging is made of eco-friendly materials like upcycled plastic, and the brand is constantly donating to global causes through their Giving Back program. So when you buy a watch, you can choose to support one of 3 sustainable causes, which are providing clean water in the Central African Republic, supporting education for children in India, or preserving rainforest in Latin America. This is why Nordcreen really stood out to me personally. I think it's so great that there are brands out there that have such a beautiful philosophy behind their products. But the watches themselves are stunning as well, and one amazing point about them are these interchangeable straps that lets you change the style of your watch in several different ways. I personally chose the model Native with this navy blue leather strap and with a silver mesh strap to change things up. The link to the Nordcreen website is in my description, and you guys can now get 15% off of everything by using my code JOURNAL at the checkout. So do yourself a favor and treat yourself with a beautiful new watch. But that's it about the sponsor of the month. Thank you so much for Nordcreen for supporting my channel, and now let's get back to our notebooks. So of course, since we have a Harry Potter theme, I wanted to dedicate at least 1 page to write down my own Hogwarts profile. However, before starting with the profile page, I actually wanted to create this Hogwarts patch or logo first on this other one. So this Hogwarts logo showcases all the houses and their animals, and instead of following the original one directly this time, I wanted to create my own version by painting a bit more realistic look of these animals. So I started to sketch this on its own watercolor paper that will make this pop nicely on the page when we glue it down, and it took me a while to decide the shape of this whole thing and then deciding all the positions and sizes of the animals. I used some real animal pictures as my guide while I was sketching all of these, so it's not like I just threw them out of my pure imagination. But after the pencil sketches were detailed enough, I reached for my watercolors once more and started to add some color and detail to these one at a time. I started from the Gryffindor's lion and laid down a light wash of these reddish browns first, before starting to slowly layer darker tones on the areas where there were deeper shadows on my reference picture. I ended up defining the outlines of these animals with a black pen and then colored the black backgrounds of these animals with a deeper shade of the house color. So for Gryffindor, it was this deep dark red. Next, I moved on to the green serpent of the Slytherin house. I wanted to keep the snake a bit more grayish tone so it wouldn't completely blend together with the background. Then I just work with it in a similar way as I did with the lion, by gradually deepening the colors and creating more details to the drawing. Honestly, I sometimes struggle to come up with stuff to explain in these tutorials because sometimes I don't even know what I'm doing myself. I just pretty much let the paints do the work and then just figure things out with a trial and error style. There are always things that don't turn out the way I imagined in the start, but it's not always a bad thing, and the beauty of especially watercolors is that sometimes the end result turns out much nicer than you initially thought. So after the serpent, the next one was the badger of the Hufflepuff house, which I wanted to keep a bit more cute and fluffy looking on purpose. But then the last, and for me the most difficult, was this dark raven of the Ravenclaw house. I went back and forth with an eagle or raven, but eventually ended up with this since I thought it might look a bit cooler. Anyway, darker paintings like these are always more difficult to create in my opinion. So I tried my best to keep some color variation in the wings and body without taking everything too dark to the point of losing the details. I added some shadow to the frame as well, and that was finally it for this Hogwarts patch. So now I just cut it out and taped it to my notebook, and I really think it added a nice element to this whole theme. But after that, as I mentioned, I moved on to create the profile page. So I first started by painting this Hufflepuff logo where the badger was by itself. Since I happen to be a proud member of Hufflepuff House, I also wanted to add the Hufflepuff title here and made this whole thing look as pretty as I could in my absolute hurry state in this point of the video. My goal was to make this frame really stand out and then just draw some swirls and other pretty decorations to add something here at the top. If you belong to a different house, you can just change this one up to match your own information, but I thought this was definitely the most fun page to create this month, so I definitely encourage you to dig up your online test results if you're a fellow Potter fan. So next I wrote down all the information about my wand and Patronus I got by doing the tests on the website. I'll link it to the description if you're not familiar with it, and you can also give it a go. But yeah, that was finally it for this one. I really liked how this whole spread came together, and now we have only a few pages left of this theme, I promise. So next we have the weekly layout to set up, which I kept very simple this month, kinda to balance everything out. So I started by adding a small calendar at the top, and this month I went with a weekly layout that fits 2 weeks on this one spread. So this first weekly will actually have 11 days, so from the first Thursday to the first full week Sunday. I created my small habit tracker and meal tracker to those days here at the top, and then the bottom half of this whole spread will be for the daily boxes that I use for my task lists. Since there were only 1.5 weeks on this one, I decided to just fill the empty space with this random weekly diary section, but on the next ones there would be daily boxes here as well. Lastly, again to bring some color to this spread, I added some of those watercolor splashes again, and after that it finished up this super simple weekly layout. I flipped through a few pages that I'll use for the rest of the weeks in October, and lastly I'll just quickly show you how I set up a simple monthly review in the end of everything. I leave the last page empty for now and show you later on Instagram what I end up filling it with. I already kind of have an idea for it, but since this video was already so long and heavy with all the decorations, I just decided to leave it for Instagram, and you can also see it in the next month's flip through. But as always, I like to write down a few questions for myself to review the past month. This is something I've done for years in my journal in this point, and I think it's such a good way to wrap up the previous month and set your mind to the next. But after that, we're finally done. Oh my god, this was the most challenging, but at the same time, so fun and special theme to set up. I definitely thought I couldn't pull out a Harry Potter theme, but I'm so happy you guys requested it, so I finally had to just challenge myself with it. As always, if you're new here and want to stay tuned for more art and journaling, subscribing would be highly appreciated. But I guess that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you're having an amazing day or night wherever you are, and see you in my next one. Bye bye!